Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DANCNG SOBR podcast. Thank you so much for coming to see us every week. I try to bring you new and exciting stuff as much as I can. I want to thank our sponsor, Movita Juice Bar, for supporting us from day one. Go to movitajuicebar.com to order some fresh drinks. They only use good stuff, only good ingredients in their products, or order through your food apps. I want to thank Outer Circle Media, where we record this podcast. If you're interested in making your own podcast, reach out to outercirclemedia.com. This week we have curator, museum administrator, ladies and gentlemen, Pilar Tompkins Rivas. Hey everybody, welcome back to the DANCNG SOBR podcast, where today we have an illustrious guest. Not only Jesus and Mero have illustrious guests, so do I. Ladies and gentlemen, Pilar Tompkins Rivas.
Hello, hello. It's so great to be here.
Curator and administrator, just all around force.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rafa. I'm so happy to be
I
here.
really appreciate you taking time to come out and just chat with me, seriously. I know how busy you are and all of these things that we're going to get into right now that you're working on. So I'm excited to start.
I'm grateful for the invitation and been following your podcast since it started. So I'm super happy to join you today. Really thrilled.
Thank you. I like to just warm up the guests and also the audience with just talking a little bit about the person themselves and just filling them in with the context of who you are and where you were born and where you grew up.
Sure, let's take it back all the way. I was born in Dallas, Texas, and grew up there. I attended an arts high school, performing arts high school called the Booker T. Washington High School for Performing and Visual Arts, which actually is kind of famous. It's a really renowned school in the country, and it graduated a lot of famous people, especially in the music industry, like Erykah Badu went to school, and when I was there, I went to school with her, and then Nora Jones came later, and back in the 80s, I don't know if you know Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians, but they were from the school, as well as a lot of amazing jazz musicians as well. So it was an amazing environment, and then my mother was the director of the art program. She was an art teacher for almost 40 years, and my sister went there, my nephew went there, my dad was a volunteer, so we were really intertwined with that school, and that was really formative for my background and upbringing.
Totally. So now I have to ask, did you do musical theater?
No, I did visual art.
All visual art.
But everyone was always doing that around me. So I grew up in this environment there where people were constantly singing in the hallways, running around, dancing, just practicing their soliloquies on the side, breaking out in song in the class. And, we spent 3 hours a day doing art, 4 hours of academics. And so it was just like this really creative environment. And I was always around a lot of people from all these other disciplines. So
what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 92.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fun times.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's exciting. I want to talk more about that later.
Sure.
So is that where you started to form, or I mean, if your mom was a part of all that, you probably had art around you your whole life, maybe?
I did. My mom, as I mentioned, was an art educator in public schools for like 4 decades. So we had, art books lying around the house. And I remember looking at like Jansen's art history book when I was a little kid and like thumbing through that, or a book on Michelangelo's, masterworks, and like just being interested. I didn't think about pursuing art when I was very young, but it became that thing that I was drawn to. And then when it was time to go to high school, I had to make a portfolio and applied for that school and really just, took to it. Before that, I was doing, I always went to public schools, but they put me early on into like a talented and gifted program. And so I was doing math. So I was like competing in math Olympiads when I was really young.
That makes so much sense. That's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, they had me. I mean, I started high school doing like geometry, having done like all the algebras before when I was little, and taking like the PSATs and SATs in junior high. So I went to it was a public program, a public program in the school system. But I actually still am friends with a lot of people from that period. We grew really close. So I went from kind of math to art.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. I was in a gifted and talented program too, and it was around the time of Miami Vice, so we used to call our group GP Vice, Gifted People Vice, which is stupid, but
that's cool.
Yeah. So back then, when you started to look at art and do art yourself, did you have aspirations to be a painter or go into a different actually?
Yes, the short answer is yes, absolutely, 100%. I started painting when I was about 14, and I just fell in love with it. And then when I was 15, we did a trip with some people from the school to Mexico, and I remember going to Mexico City and seeing, Diego Rivera and Siqueiros and Orozco, and seeing their master murals, and I just fell in love at that point. That was like, I couldn't think of anything more important to do with my life than to paint, and my aspiration was to be a muralist. And that was that really shifted something inside me. I think I had a turning point when I was about 15. I said, this is what I want to do.
Is there any murals that you might have done as a kid that still exist?
I don't think they still exist. You know, when you're younger, they end up being on like portable substrates and that type of thing. But it's amazing how the world can come full circle, because now at the Lucas Museum, there's a mural, project on the fence outside the construction site that was done with high school students. Before I got there, I wasn't involved in it, but when I was in high school, we did the same type of project in a partnership with the Dallas Museum of Art around the development and construction of part of their campus, and was asked to do that. So yeah, it was so interesting how those things, how you end up coming back to certain moments in your life. But I did that for a long time. I actually, at a high school in Dallas, I did some murals in schools in Dallas, so they're probably still around, unless they painted over them. They could have. I don't know. I don't know if they're there anymore.
So did you go to college out in Texas, or did you already move to California?
I went to UT Austin.
Oh, okay.
I had really, really, really wanted to go to art school. I wanted to go to San Francisco Art Institute and had a scholarship to go. And we didn't have the money. So, art school seemed like a bad idea to my parents.
Of course, yeah.
Because of the expenses. And I ended up going to state school. But it was a really great program. And then I was really happy, with what I did there. And then also had the opportunity to branch out. And I did Latin American studies as well. So I did a double major. And that was very formative as well, because I ended up studying in Brazil. And I was there for more than a year, learned Portuguese, learned to samba, learned to dance, learned to sing, things like that. Really became interested in Brazilian culture, Afro-Brazilian culture, and the African diaspora in the Americas. And that really broadened my worldview, because prior to that, I mean, it's very, contained in Texas, just your Latino experience. There's it's very segregated. It was still very racist growing up. It still is. Yeah. But, you feel those tensions. And it was really interesting for me to go to another context where cultures had similar types of ethnic groups, but configured in different ways, and it was a totally different experience.
So when you go somewhere like that, I think you were in Sao Paulo, right?
First, and then Salvador Bahia.
And Salvador. When you go to study abroad, and you were in this Latin art studies program, or what was the program?
It was Latin American studies, and then within that, I focused on art and art history. So
what kind of things do you do in your art focus? What kind of things did the school show you?
Well, I took art classes both in Sao Paulo and in Salvador.
From artists over there?
From art, yeah,
Wow.
in the university. I studied at the University of Sao Paulo and the Federal University of Bahia. So I took art classes the same you would take here. But I also took classes on culture, Brazilian culture, which was not only art but music and religious traditions that inform other aspects of culture. Like in the northeast of Brazil, candomblé is a very important religion, and so it has a lot of ways that it's manifested in cultural forms of expression, from dance to music to not only ritual and religion, but all these other ways that it intersects with culture at large.
This had to be like a very, like, you must have been a sponge.
Oh, absolutely.
Young,
yeah.
out of your country, and just seeing everything that is crazy interesting
and trying to learn a new language as well. Had so many mishaps with that. Like trying to ask for the bathroom and ending up asking for the bathtub, things like that. Or not understanding how many kisses they give in Brazil, and I planted one on, the host grandfather, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So.
Well, that's nice.
But no, it was an amazing experience.
Yeah. And so now Pilar leaves college, and she comes back, leaves that part of college, comes back to the U.S. Do you go back to Texas or California?
I went back to Austin. I still had a semester left, I think, after that. So I finished up. I was working for a production company. This is before digital. So we were making mural backdrops for events. So I ran a crew. I think the first time I was ever director, I was 21. Wow. So I was running a crew of like 7 other artists, making these enormous backdrops that were installed in different convention centers and events. So I think that was really helpful for me to, later on, to learn exhibition making, because I had to create a plan on basically, in my sketch pad of what we were going to do that would end up being like 70 feet wide and 40 feet tall. And like, how do you organize it so that all these people are working on their parts, and you might have like a week or 2 weeks to finish it. So, working with the crews making the flats was what we had, and we used theatrical paints. It was actually such an interesting job. I loved doing it. I loved painting that way because you had to stand up. The flats were on the floor, and we put our brushes on the end of bamboo sticks. And then we had, theater paints that would come in gallons. So we would mix, you'd be standing there and mixing, and my forearm used to be so strong. And I was really athletic at the time, so I would be carrying like these big 4x8s around like nothing, or then like just carrying these 5-gallon buckets of paint everywhere. I loved it. I mean, this was absolutely one of the best, times of my life. And of course it was Texas, so we'd be really, really hot working in the warehouse. And we'd take a lunch break, and then we like go down to the creek and jump off a rope swing into the water. Wow. Eat a sandwich or a taco, and then like go back to work.
Wow.
So
that's dope.
The salad days of Austin. Yeah.
So I imagine also it was like your first like project managing kind of type gigs, and you learned to run crews. And
yeah, it was. I mean, I didn't think of it at the time in that way, but it was the first time where I was leading a group of people and building consensus and working like towards a goal. Yeah. And that's pretty much what I do today.
That sounds like a beautiful time in your life, and a beautiful space that you were in. So now I'm wondering, like, what is it that like pulled you towards California?
Well, I was working on a project for that company where we were actually like looking at decades. This was, I think it was going to be the year 2000. So we were looking back at the previous century, and I was doing like one image per decade. This is how I quit that job. But we got to the 70s, and I was making an image, that had Cesar Chavez, and they told me that I couldn't include Cesar Chavez. Wow. And I said, "You're crazy. We have to include Cesar Chavez in the United Farm Workers logo," and I think it was the flag. And my boss told me that it wasn't appreciated, and people wouldn't know who he was. Wow. And I said, well, if they don't know who he is, then they should learn. and this is one way that they can learn. And he said, take it out. And I just dropped I remember like I had my sketchbook there, and I literally dropped it on the floor, and I sat down in my chair, and I just crossed my arms and put down my brush, and I was like, not gonna do it. And then I just didn't come to work.
Wow.
I called in and I said, that's it, I'm done. I'm not gonna do this anymore. And I ended up deciding to go back to school, and I wanted to learn fresco mural technique. So I had already done some study in Mexico, and I know they teach it, or at the time, it was a long time ago, they taught it at La Esmeralda. And so I said, well, since I've already studied there, let me go to Europe. I'd never been to Europe. And I found a school in Florence that taught fresco technique.
Wow.
And I went over there specifically to learn that and take classes. So I went to a post-baccalaureate program, and I was over there for a while and was really amazed with everything I saw. Had a studio within the building of that school, and made a lot of work, had a lot of fun, made good friends.
Where is that work?
I gave a lot of my paintings away. Yeah. So some friends have it, some is lost to time. What I was going to say kind of like bridged me to California was I came back from the program, and I didn't have a place of my own anymore. So a lot of my stuff went to the garage in my parents' house. And then I rented a studio for a little while in Dallas, but I felt like I was still like living a gypsy lifestyle, I guess, at that time. And then I was out in LA visiting a friend. I was also a serious salsa dancer.
Really?
I still love to dance salsa, but I was at the time like crazy about it, and was dancing like 3-4 times a week and going to what they call the international salsa congresses. So there was one in LA, and I came to visit my friend and go dance in that. And she said, just stay a couple weeks. So I stayed a couple weeks, and I was kicking it around LA, not doing anything. And I said, there's murals in Los Angeles. I've heard about them. I had at that point not even seen any. And I looked up murals in LA, probably on Bing or some other old search engine.
Ask Jeeves.
I don't know. Yahoo probably had it, and it led me to Spark.
Okay.
And so I contacted Spark, and that led to meeting Judy Baca, and she invited me to work on a temporary project restoring her world wall. And so I was working on that project when I got a phone call from my mother saying that their house had been struck by lightning, and it burned to the studs, and they barely got out, and they had to resuscitate my dog, and everything was gone.
Wow.
So I did lose a lot of paintings then. I don't even remember what is lost and what's where, but a lot of things burnt, most everything burnt. And I told my mom, Mom, I'll be home on the next plane. And she said, don't come home. There's no home to come home to.
Dude, this is like the opening movie lines. This is like the opening movie, like lightning strikes. Mom, don't come home. There's no home to come to.
That's what she told me.
Oh, my God.
Like, pretty much, that was verbatim what she told me. And she said, if you have a couch to sleep on and a gig, you should stay over there.
Wow.
And so I said, okay, because they were in a very, precarious situation and what was going on. And I just stayed. So that's how I ended up.
How old were you at that time?
20. I was probably 26.
Wow.
It was 2001. May 2001. It'll be 22 years this weekend.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was through, what do they call it?
An act of
Divine
God.
intervention that you stayed in
The
Los
hand
Angeles.
of God.
The hand of God reached down. Wow.
Yes, I know. I mean, the house was rebuilt. Thank God no one was hurt.
Yeah, definitely.
But it was definitely like one of those defining moments when everything changed, and going back wasn't really an option, and, sticking around was the best thing that I could do, and trying to make my way. So that's what I did.
Wow. And so what was the first, institution that you gravitated towards besides, you worked with Judy Bach on the wall, but was there somewhere else that you ended up getting a job that made you stay, or did you go back to school right away?
Well, I had that gig with Judy, so I was connected to her and tangentially to Spark just through friendships for a really long time, and continued to be a huge supporter. But I also was trying to show my work as an artist, and I went to Self-Help Graphics and met Christina Ochoa, who was the director of the gallery at the time, and she was really kind to me and gave me a few opportunities. So I worked towards like my one and only show in LA, which was at El Portal restaurant in Pasadena.
Really?
Yes.
Dude, that's fucking awesome.
So that was like my big moment, you know, as an artist. And I thought, oh my God, because I was making money in Texas, and I, you know, was doing commissions. I was doing little mural gigs. I was making work for people and selling my work. So, you know, it's just cost of living. I was like, oh, I can totally make it over there. And then I started here, and I was like, wait a second, all my money is gone. Right away. It only lasted a few months, really, where I was like, oh, once I got an apartment and had to pay rent, I was like, that one painting that I sold is not going to float me. So I met Salomon Huerta.
Okay.
And Salo was a very important person for me, continues to be, and a mentor, and asked him if he knew of any galleries that were hiring. And he said, my gallery is looking for somebody. And so he introduced me to his dealer. Her name was Patricia Four. She passed away a number of years ago, but she's considered one of the art mavens, you know, from the 60s, 70s, just a really influential person in that period in LA's art scene. And she kind of hired me on the spot. She was really funny. I was wearing like some white suit that I was sporting around Italy, and, you know, I was kind of recently back from Europe and had changed my look, and she was like, oh, you'll do, honey, you know. That was it. That was like, I was like, do you want to see my resume? She's like, no, Salomon says you're fine. So, and then I was like, all right. And then I worked there for just a couple of months, not knowing what I was doing, but the director was really kind to me and taught me a lot. And then she left, and then I became the director like a few months later.
What?
And that's sort of how these things happen, you know,
Wow.
like somebody leaves and then you have to step in to fill that role. And so all of a sudden I was director of that gallery, and Mark Bradford was an artist that we were showing. So
Wow.
Mark was a very good friend and also mentor to me. And, you know, both he and Salomon just really helped to show me what it was all about. And, you know, Patty, the dealer, you know, she had a different perspective, and she was not always nice to me, so I had a lot of like tough learning, you know, but I did learn a lot, you know, trial by fire, I guess. And then when you're mounting so many shows, you're mounting a show every 6 weeks and doing everything around exhibition making. Like, it was like for years. So I did it for 5 years. So I went from that gallery to another gallery called The Project from New York, which is an amazing gallery with a roster of artists from all around the world, many of whom are, you know, very famous, important artists. And because I spoke multiple languages, and at this point they sent me also to all the fairs. I went to all the art fairs. I started traveling a lot for that position especially, and really got to understand the global art scene. And everything happened fast. I mean, between doing the shows in the galleries to doing the other projects and then the art fairs, I mean, in 5 years I mounted like 100 shows.
I think things for you kept going fast, because it seemed like every time I would see you, you were doing one thing, then I'd see you again, you're like, oh, you're over here now. I moved on, and then you just kept like doing different things and just working hard.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of hustling. I just, you know, didn't have there. I never had a safety net, you know, never had resources or anything like that, or could really, you know, fall back on financial support from anybody else. So I was always like trying to do as many things as I could at once. So I always tried to do like my main job plus a little side thing, you know, trying to make sure that I could stay afloat. I mean, LA is a hard town to survive in, and I think that was always that like survivor's mentality, like I just got to make sure, you know. And sometimes it was really hard if the gallery wouldn't pay me. And
so having started in
anyways,
these,
couldn't eat.
I feel you. Having started in these commercial galleries and learning that whole system and world, and then I mean, we didn't even get into you coming to California yet, or going back to school yet, but you're working in all these commercial galleries, and then you eventually end up going to like nonprofit institutions, right?
Yeah.
So how did that shift happen? And I mean, I don't want to say like, do you prefer commercial or nonprofit, because they're two different things, but can you tell us a little bit about like what it is to work for one and then the other?
Yeah, I mean, I never anticipated that I would be in a gallery setting, but at the same time, it was something that was like right in front of me in a way, and something available as an opportunity. And when I was working for specific artists within those contexts, I felt like there was a purpose. As things kind of shift and change for me in that landscape of having to move from one gallery to another, at the end, I was working for a gallery where I didn't really feel that I was purpose-driven, and that became, just a struggle to think about what was I really doing. Like, if I wasn't making work anymore by that point, and I wasn't supporting artists that I really cared about, what was the purpose? And so that was something that I grappled with, and ultimately, it just kind of came to its conclusion, and I started trying to think, what would be next? What would I do? And I did think like, oh, would I be a consultant and try to sell work? And it just didn't feel right, because in that type of a setting, you have to spend the majority of your time with the clients. And I wanted to spend the majority of my time with the artists. So I really started to try out my hand at curatorial practice, and a few projects, came up, and those opportunities, all DIY, all very shoestring, but at least it felt like I was going in the right direction. And I had to like learn to embrace and trust my judgment. And by that time, having had a lot of experience in exhibition making and that process, and the understanding how do you present that to the public, I had the tools. And then as an artist, I had a sense of what I was committed to. So those were kind of anchor points for me as I started to develop the curatorial practice. And then I don't know if you know Bill Moreno. He was recently minted as the director of the Claremont Museum of Art, and he invited me to do projects there, and I'm happy to do that, excited to do that, and that's where I did one of the first big shows that I really felt good about. I felt like, okay, this is what I want to do. Was Vexing Female Voices from East LA Punk. And so that was a type of show where I really felt like this was a vein that I really wanted to explore, and it brought together a lot of my interests and ability to like work not only with artists, but with histories of music and performance theater. All those things started to like converge in that type of a show for me.
Yeah, I think definitely like all of these shows that you put together, and they're like group shows, have that feeling that you just mentioned, where you were like, do I want to do this for the collectors, or do I want to do this for the artists? And you definitely, I think, support artists a lot. Like it's very clear how much you love the artists and the artist community and want to uplift them. And that's something that you do a lot with your work.
Oh, well, thank you for that.
Appreciate that.
That's the most important thing to me. I feel such empathy and affinity and affection for artists, having been an artist myself, and just feel like it's a very solitary practice. Sometimes I would just really struggle being myself in the canvas, and you have to start someplace, and and then you have to see that thing through, and it's hard, and then you have to put it out on the wall for someone to assess and give you feedback, and you may have spent like 100 hours on that thing, and they walk by in 2 seconds. I just know that feeling, and I know that artists need support, and more broadly, Latino artists need support, and like the narratives that come from our community are really, really underrepresented, and like you have to work to push to open the canons of art history, open the institutions, open the opportunities. It's all sides of it. So for me, I know, I wouldn't place so much importance on the distinctions of something being commercial, not commercial, because I think in the art world, like the, spokes of a wheel, all the pieces are connected, and you have to make sure that you're putting attention to all of those areas. You got to do the writing, you got to do the scholarship, you have to do the research, you have to work with artists' archives, you have to help the people in their 80s, you got to help the people in their 40s, you got to help the people in their 20s, you got to help people all along the way
Yeah.
because it's part of one ecosystem. And
Yeah.
sometimes you have to rescue artworks from under people's beds, or there's so many different things. You
Yeah.
gotta
No, it's true.
write those letters, like stay up till 3 a.m. to write letters for people for their grants, and it just
Yeah.
all the opportunities.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I just think about it all as like an ecosystem of things that have to be worked on.
I love that you explained it as an ecosystem, because I'm always impressed at how people like you in these positions with so many things on your plate, and it's not like you're just the curator, or you have, I don't know how to explain this, but you have to give attention to so many details across a really broad spectrum of things, including like the artists, their ages, their location, where you just so many tiny little different details, and I don't know how your brain works. And I wish my brain worked that way, because I'm like a one task per day person. I can only handle a certain amount of things every day, and then I have to take a nap. My brain just doesn't have that anymore. But yes, I love just the fact that you put it as an ecosystem and can view the broad spectrum of things in that. So I do want to come back a little bit to how you then how you ended up at 18th Street and then UCLA and all these other museums. If you can just like a little bit of your trajectory to end up where you are now.
Yeah. Let me hopscotch kind of through them a little bit quickly, because I have worked at a lot of different places. I have not been that type of person to go and stay for a long time, not because I didn't like that place, but sometimes, there isn't funding in our organizations, or you're on, a grant-funded position, and so it will only be there for a little while, and you have to make moves accordingly. But I was kind of jumping back to the Claremont Museum of Art and being there. The financial crisis hit in 2008, and the museum closed from one day to the next. We were opening shows on a Saturday. We all got laid off the Friday before. And that is, through it wasn't anybody's fault. It happened, and then we all lost our jobs. So around the same time, the first Pacific Standard Time was happening, looking at Los Angeles art history between 1945 and 1980. So that post-war period, really critical period. Having worked for Patricia Ford, who was someone of that period, and I was introduced to so many artists, I was very familiar with what that scene was like, because I visited with those senior artists like every day. They would come in for lunch, or they were part of the roster, or they were friends, and so they're always around. So I heard the stories from back in the day, and so that made me feel very comfortable, like working in that vein. And then I immediately kind of got picked up 2 gigs, essentially. I think of myself as somebody who gigs a lot, until you get gigging, until you kind of get a permanent job, is definitely how I've made my path. But one of them was for the city of LA, the Department of Cultural Affairs, so to do their history of their art galleries, their spaces, the Municipal Art Gallery and the Watts Towers Art Center were the primary areas of focus. But I did research basically the history of the city's engagement with art going back to the late 19th century. The archives for the city are amazing. They are incredible. And then also started working with John Noriega at UCLA at the Chicano Studies Research Center, and we did a suite of exhibitions called LA Chicano. And there were ultimately 5 shows, but I worked on 2 primarily, a survey of Oscar Castillo's photography, and then another show that looked at a history of 5 arts organizations and collectives. And that did include history of Spark and Chicano and self-help graphics, and Oscar was included in that, and so it was a really important opportunity for me to be able to do a lot of deep research. Goa's Art Gallery was part of that as well, but do a lot of deep research around those histories, the artists, and really looking at everything from archives to artworks to oral histories, to collaborations with younger artists who are reflecting on that period.
Wow. And you guys ended up publishing a book with all that.
We did, yes, yeah. It won a few awards, and I think I even have a gold medal for my for being an editor on that book. But again, these are like project-based opportunities, and I'm married and have 3 kids, and so when babies are on the way, you're like, oh, I gotta have health insurance. So
you want to get a permanent 40-hour-a-week
something.
job.
So I was lucky enough to get the job at 18th Street Art Center, which is an artist residency program. Loved that. Loved being able to work with artists. And it was an international program, but we also have the gallery space where I invited artists to come in and use that space for a couple of months. They would have like 2-3 month run, and they could spend like almost, I think it was like 6 weeks in that space developing work, and we would just talk and be there to support them and foster their conversations and facilitate if they need help. But I mean, artists need space, time, money. Like that's what they need. And so if you can like give that to them and then just be there to talk, I mean, I feel like great things can happen. And so that was a really wonderful experience to be able to support people in that way.
It seems like with every experience that you had, it just like I don't know, catapulted you to the next one. And you had an experience that just catapulted you to the next one. And it feels like nothing was lost on you, and you carry everything that you've learned to the next project.
They all seem to feed into each other, or there's a way, that they can all get utilized. But I've definitely learned new things. When I went to, LACMA, that was an opportunity to begin to learn about fellowship programs for undergraduates and graduates, and thinking really strongly about intersections between academia and the museum field, and how to foster bridges for young people of color to get into this work in the first place. So that was what I did there, and it was a huge learning opportunity. I also was able to co-curate 2 big exhibitions there, A Universal History of Infamy with Rita Gonzalez and Jose Luis Blondet, and Home So Different, So Appealing.
One of my favorite shows ever.
Thank you, with John Noriega and Mari Carmen Ramirez as well.
That was a beautiful show, and that's another show where there's something that you do, and I was lucky enough to work with you once when we had a show at VPAM, and you magically, with your words and with your curatorial expertise, you elevate work. You really do. And I just got to give you your props for that, because I wasn't sure what my work was, and you helped me see like what it was and helped me like frame it in a way that I appreciate. So.
Oh, thank you. I really loved working with you and that process and project.
Yeah, thank you so much. But you do that for other. I mean, I was like, I'm a self-taught photographer that didn't know what the hell I was doing when I came to you. But you also do that for other artists that are trained professionals and know about their work and know how to talk about it. But you still, like, even theirs, like, you can elevate work with what you do. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, there's always. I mean, that's, I guess, kind of the at the heart of the work is to really try to see it with new eyes, and then say, well, what can we bring to this to provide a greater level of understanding and visibility for the artist practice? I mean, those are things that I do think about. There are lots of things that curators strategize around and think through. And I mean, I didn't have a training as a formal art historian. I learned art history throughout my life, but I didn't learn it like kind of going through and say, I'm going to get my Ph.D. in art history and then apply that, exactly with this lens to curatorial practice. But I feel like there's been an approach that has worked for me where I definitely love working with living artists, especially because we can be more collaborative and we can talk about things. But I'm also like that type of person who gets crazy excited with archives and art and historic work, and I'm like, oh my God. And, I just like a piece of paper will thrill me to no end. Boxable photographs will like blow my mind. And then I just see all these connections, and then I want to write about that, and I want to, put that out into the world, and hopefully offer new pathways for people to think about visual culture. And new ways of thinking about the world that we live in and what artists can show us.
Yeah. So I mean, we did hopscotch through some of your places you've worked at, and I want to get to where you are now, which is the George Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. Did I say it right?
It's close. It's the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. Very close.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in the middle, I think it's important to say that I worked at the Vincent Price Art Museum for 5 years.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I was the chief curator and director of the museum, and that was an incredible experience and time in my life. Mm-hmm.
So actually, before we get to the Lucas, I did want to mention, like, so you started as a painter, you got into your curatorial, doing curatorial work, and then administrator.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how? So that's what I mean. Like, every time you
Yeah.
did something, it kind of, it's like you took everything that you learned and got the next job. Then you took everything that you learned and got the next job. You know, and just kept, you know, leveling up, I guess is the word I can think of.
Yeah.
And really, like, a natural step was where you are now. Like, so you are the head curator,
Yes, chief curator.
chief
Mhm.
curator, and assistant director.
I am one of 3 deputy directors right now at the museum, but I'm deputy director of curatorial and collections. Chief curator and deputy director of curatorial and collections.
And was that a natural move? I guess. Well, I guess also in there. I mean, in 1 hour is ridiculous to try to tell your entire story, but I know that in between all that, you went back to school and also got a PhD.
I'm not done with my PhD, but
Okay.
I have been in school again since
Okay.
2014, continuously.
Okay. Oh,
Mhm.
so you
I
got
did
your
my-
master's.
I
And
did
you're
my
working on your
master's and I
PhD.
rolled through to my PhD. I'm not finished with my PhD, but I'm done with all my coursework, and I'm
And so your
getting closer.
master's was in
cultural studies.
cultural studies.
Mm-hmm.
And how did any of that, or how did all of this get you to the point where, like, you are now here? Or,
Yeah, it's been really, really important for me to have done this work at that academic work at the same time as my professional work, because so much of what I have ended up curating is informed by what I'm reading and what I'm thinking about, and the framework and structure of cultural studies is it's very broad and inclusive of culture writ large, but also looking at forms of dominant culture and hegemony, and like thinking about how we counter that and how you can disrupt, agitate, and change, and like trying to understand what are the structures of society that that exist, that you may be born into, that are oppressive. And so how do you move beyond that, and what is a history of thought and a history of practice and resistance? So all that falls under like what can be studied in cultural studies. So decolonial theory is, all it's part of that. And I found it really, really helpful to actually study that as opposed to studying just the canon of art history, because the canon of art history isn't to date inclusive of Latino Latinx art production, which is what I focus on. So we have to write that history anew, but we also have to question the canon and why it's not inclusive. It's set up that way. So why is it set up that way? These are socio-political structures that are embedded within institutions that we are born into, and then we have to push them open, break them apart. And so for me, that was a very important thing to do concurrent to my work, because it gave me the tools to be able to think about what I would like to see, and what I hope other people would like to see, and what we can strategize, around to affect change.
wow. I think I'm going to rewind what you said right there like 5 times over and over and look up a few words. But no, you honestly like put your thoughts together so succinctly, and I fumble as I try to make questions for you here. Yeah, that's
But I think you wanted to know also sort of why the Lucas too, maybe. Well, I guess I could just jump between that moment of transition for me and working at Vincent Price. I mean, I had the opportunity to be there and work in that platform, for almost 5 years and learn new skills. Fundraising, very important thing.
Yes.
That really is part of the ecosystem as well, is building up the supporters in order to make the work happen. And so building, it's not only the content, but it's the constructs around being able to present the content, and then even having the ability to hire the people that help you to do that work, and then you can train and open up and bring them into the fold so that you can step away and they can take over. So that's like how it all like sort of works together. And then at a certain point, new opportunities began to present themselves, and I was ready to start looking around, and this opportunity came up. And when I met with our director, Sandra Jackson Dumont, and in my first conversation with her, I was really blown away by what she was talking about, what she expressed to me that the museum was really all about, and that they were charting a course for a new museum that is centered on the stories of people. It's a museum dedicated to visual storytelling, and that is pretty much what I've been focused on doing my entire life. And I was like, oh my God, is this a place for me? This could be a place for me. And then when we got into talking about the values of the museum and the mission, and being rooted in South Los Angeles and the communities, the direct media communities that the museum will serve, it felt like this is a journey that I wanted to go on. And I've been with the museum now for about 2 years, and it's really, really thrilling. It's really exciting to be there. And I can't wait till we open. It's going to be 2023, 24, sometime around then when we open, but so it's a little ways off, but I can't wait. I mean, every day I'm really filled with a lot of excitement about what we're building and what we can and will do, and the ways that we can partner with other people within the community, other organizations, create opportunities for young people, all the artists that we're going to work with. I mean, I'm just thrilled to be able to have this platform to work collaboratively with so many great folks.
Having a few experiences with museum myself, I know now how long it takes you guys to plan for an exhibition, and the process you go through to get an exhibit up. What are the exhibits that we can expect when you guys open, and when will you guys open? Do you guys have a hard date yet?
No, we're eyeing 23, 24 for opening. And, when we're ready to talk more about the opening exhibitions, then I would love to come back. Okay. Love to come back. But definitely, when we begin, we'll be opening with a lot of work from the collection itself.
What if we record 3 different endings where you talk about maybe it's this show, maybe it's this show, and then we'll let people decide.
Right. Well, it's a very big museum, so there'll be multiple shows.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually 100,000 square feet of exhibition space, so it's multiple. And
I'm interested in because of the location of the museum and the communities around it. I'm interested in how the museum is doing outreach, or even how they plan to be inclusive of local artists, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so amazing that the museum, one of the first people that was hired at the museum was, Maisha Ward, who is someone whose position is to work with communities and being in community engagement. So that is at the very core of what the museum is doing, and we're structured around. One of our pillars is diversity, equity, access, inclusion, and belonging. So, it's part of the core value system of the organization. And then within that, I just oversee the art part. We have amazing teams of people who do a lot more work around community engagement and programs, and setting up strategies for educational partnerships. I mean, I think there are many, many things that will happen when we open, and then more things are going to happen that are going to unfold over time. But that is our thinking, and our goal right now is to be multi-pronged, multifaceted, so that there are many, many ways that people can connect to the institution.
How does someone approach the Lucas or any other museum, for that matter, to put on, to maybe be considered for a show?
Well, I mean, I think...
I'm asking for a friend.
For a friend. Always emailing the museum, you can always email a general email address at the museum, and then that will make its way to Curatorial, where we, can start conversations and then, find out what's right for both parties and what time. And I think that there's a lot of different ways that artists can be engaged with the museum. So it could be a show, it could be acquisitions, it could also be, leading a program, it could also be doing a residency, it could be,
Are you guys gonna have residencies?
it's possible. We're thinking about that, so it could be coming in and doing a special project where you're looking at the collections and then, producing a programmatic series out of that. So, I think there's just many, many ways that things will unfold again over time, and lots of opportunities. It's a big place, and we believe that it will be inclusive and big enough for a lot of voices.
I'm really looking forward to that. And I pass by that museum often, or the construction site often on the train, and get to see the progress. I do want to go back. We have a little bit of time left, but I definitely want to go back and talk a little bit about the work that you did with photographer Laura Aguilar. And you had the opportunity to put together one of her last shows before she moved on, passed away. And I don't know, just as a photographer, I just wanted to know a little bit about your experience with her, with all that.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I want to say Sybil Venegas was the curator of that exhibition. And then both she and Christopher Velasco are the co-administrators of her estate, and we're so close to her. And instrumental, in the work that we did at the Vincent Price Art Museum. And I was very fortunate to move from LACMA, where I was already working on 2 shows, to VPAM and inherit the opportunity to work on that show and direct that for the museum. Laura was living, at that time, but she wasn't in poor health, and she didn't even think she'd make it to the opening when I first spoke to her about the show. So we're grateful that she could, see the exhibition, and we did one public program, but she was in very ill health for a very long time. And so we lost her during, the course of that show. The Chicano Studies Research Center had been caring for the collection of her body of work for a number of years, but they were custodians of it, but it still belonged to Laura. And so over the course of doing the show, it was a collaboration with the CSRC, and Sean Noriega was very much involved in this project. And from the beginning, prior to me, starting, Karen Rapp was the director, and she was the one who initiated it. And then we were able to, produce an exhibition that I thought was really remarkable, over 100 works from Laura's practice. And they were all original photographs, with the exception of maybe like one that was a later, reprint, but everything was work that Laura had printed. And it was just fascinating to see how people responded to her work. The museum is sited on East LA College campus, and people would have very strong reactions to her images. Like, we have put up a big banner on the outside of the building, and it was from her Plush Pony series of 2 women embracing a couple. And we were closing up one day, and this guy came running from the bus stop, just like trying to open the doors. And he was like, "What is this place?" And I'm like, "It's an art museum." He's like, "But I saw that image." And I was like, "Yes, this is Laura Aguilar's exhibition. It's her retrospective." And he was like, I think it stunned him, that that there was something that he identified with. That he saw on an
so
image that was so big and so open,
Yeah.
and right there, in his community, presumably. And I was like, "Come back tomorrow," and so there he was, next day.
Wow.
And then I remember we had, another moment where we found out on Instagram, actually, that a young woman had gone into one of the video rooms. There was a video of Laura where she's nude, and she's talking about her, the way that she feels, being in Joshua Tree, and that the sun, touching her body is an embrace, and she doesn't get a lot of touch in her life. And it was a very powerful and sensitive video. And this young woman was so moved that she took off her clothes as well. And then she
Wow.
documented herself and Instagrammed it, tagged the museum, and then one of my assistants showed me, and I was like, oh boy, wow. But it's amazing that people had such an incredible reaction and that they felt seen, maybe through Laura's work. And, I tried to get the exhibition a national tour before we opened and couldn't get any other venues. And I reached out to at least 10, 12 venues. And then after the show opened, there was so much positive attention and a lot of press that we ended up with multiple venues. And in fact, it just stopped touring in New York. It continued. And then we supported the work of going through the collection so that everything could be, properly documented and do a full inventory and valuation, and helped the estate transition into being able to place works with institutions. So now her work is in museums throughout the country and in Europe.
I think that show, like with all the other shows that you've put together, the artists themselves is so present. Like the artist is just there with you as you walk through this exhibit, So I think that's part of the magic that you do. But
that's Laura. I don't want to take anything away from Laura. That's who Laura is. Okay. Laura is so special. It's not. I don't. In some ways, curatorial practice is like facilitating or just showing people. Like you have to do a lot of work. I'm not going to say that you don't do a lot of work. It's tons and tons and tons and tons of work, and it's so hard at times, and you just have to power through. And when it's on you to raise like $100,000, you're like, okay, and I got 5 months to raise this money. How am I going to do it? Because the end goal is so important. It's so critical. Yeah. You just do whatever you can and like try to figure it out and do your best. And so that becomes my role, is to like be behind the scenes, and you have to do everything to make it happen. And then you step out of the way and just let the artist shine and let that, it's her on view. I mean, this is who she is, and that's so critical for people to see. It's that she needs to be seen and heard from, and that's what's important.
What do you think? I don't know how to put this question together, but sometimes I feel like photography comes second to painting. Do you have any thoughts on that? I feel like when you're looking at galleries or looking at museums, like photography always comes. It's like, oh, well, painters first, photographers second. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
For me, no, because I would not. I think all art forms, I look at them all the same personally. I think they're all powerful. That can include, performance, or it can include, craft, or it can include installation, or, conceptual practice. I mean, it's all valid. I mean, it's really whatever the artist wants to use to express themselves is the right thing for them to do. Commercial galleries have more success placing paintings oftentimes with private collectors. And so I think there's a tendency within that realm for people to, and you end up seeing that happen more because, you're catering to a particular clientele. And they're placing the work in their home or multiple homes. Yeah. And it ends up being painting oftentimes. Yeah. So that's, I think, where it sometimes feels weighted because the art market weighs it more heavily, but I don't think that speaks to the art itself or to the artist or forms of creative expression.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I just have to say thank you so much for taking time to talk to us, and I know 1 hour is not enough to talk about all these things, and we did jump around back and forth a lot, and I hope that we covered a lot of things. Is there anything that you feel like you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Gosh, I mean, I feel like we covered a lot, and I feel so boring talking about myself.
No,
times,
this is what we want to hear.
I much rather be talking about art and artists, but no, I'm just thank you so much, Rafa, for the invitation. I'm really excited by what you're doing as well, and bringing another platform for people to be able to tell their stories. I think it's amazing.
That's why this one was about you. Real quick, can people find you on Instagram or a website or something?
Yeah, I mean, I have an Instagram, but I end up just posting pictures of my kids.
Okay.
I don't really use it professionally, but I'm there. You can certainly find me there. And then lucasmuseum.org is the website for the institution.
So let's just say lucasmuseum.org and find Pilar in there and send you an email if they have any questions.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes. Send her a lot of questions. There's a question that we ask every guest at the end of the show. And we ask if you could answer it in one sentence or as few words as possible. If a being from another planet was to come down here and see your work and wanted to know how this magic happens and came to you and said, Pilar, how do you do it? What would be your answer?
I would say in collaboration and in community with a lot of other amazing people.
Bam, freestyle right there. That's how you do it. Thank you so much, Pilar. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week.